Hercule Poirot and Clue, folded in the Satin Fan. Chapter 1. The Invitation in Crimson Ink. Hercule Poirot sat in his impeccably ordered London flat, the afternoon light filtering through heavy drapes to cast a soft glow on his polished mahogany desk. The little Belgian detective, with his fastidious moustache and immaculate suit, was savouring a moment of repose, a cup of tisane in hand, when the post arrived. His trusted friend and confidant, Captain Hastings, had just departed for a weekend in the country, leaving Poirot to his own devices, a state he found both tranquil and occasionally tedious. The letter that changed this tranquillity was delivered by the morning's post, slipped beneath the door by his discreet landlady, Mrs. Hudson. It lay atop the silver tray, its crimson envelope striking against the mundane whites and creams of bills and circulars. Poirot's eyes, sharp as a hawk's, fixed upon it immediately. The envelope bore no return address, only his name, Monsieur Hercule Poirot, inscribed in an elegant flowing script, the ink a deep, blood-like red. A wax seal embossed with the delicate outline of a folded fan secured the flap. Mon Dieu, Poirot murmured, his fingers tracing the seal. This is no ordinary invitation. It speaks of secrets, of mystère. With precision, he broke the seal and extracted a single sheet of heavy vellum. The message was brief, yet its words carried a weight that piqued his curiosity. Monsieur Poirot, your presence is requested at Ravenwood Manor, Sussex, for a gathering of singular importance this weekend. A matter of great delicacy awaits, one that requires your unparalleled intellect. All arrangements have been made. A car will collect you at precisely 3 p.m. on Friday. Discretion is paramount. Yours in anticipation, a friend. The signature was no signature at all, merely a flourish that curled like the edge of a fan. Poirot's lips twitched into a faint smile. "A friend who does not reveal their name," he said aloud, "is perhaps no friend at all. But the challenge, it is irresistible." He turned the envelope over, noting the postmark, dated 2 days prior from a small Sussex village. The wax seal intrigued him most. The fan's design was intricate, its pleats suggesting a hidden message, a secret folded within. Poirot, whose mind thrived on such subtleties, resolved to accept the invitation. After all, as he often remarked, the little grey cells, they demand exercise. Friday arrived with a mist that clung to London streets like a whispered secret. At precisely 3 p.m., a sleek black Rolls-Royce purred to a stop outside Poirot's flat. The driver, a taciturn man with a face as unreadable as stone, opened the door without a word. Poirot, clad in a tailored overcoat and carrying his silver-topped cane, stepped inside, his eyes already scanning for clues. The car's interior was luxurious, its leather seats embossed with a faint fan motif, a detail that did not escape him. The journey to Sussex was a silent one, the countryside unfolding in a blur of green hills and hedgerows. Ravenwood Manor, when it finally appeared, was a vision of Gothic grandeur. A sprawling estate of grey stone, its turrets piercing the fog, its windows glinting like watchful eyes. Ivy clung to its walls, and a gravel drive curved toward a grand entrance, where a butler, stiff as a statue, awaited. "Monsieur Poirot," the butler intoned, bowing slightly. "Welcome to Ravenwood Manor. The other guests have begun to arrive. If you will follow me. Poirot stepped into a hall of opulent decay. Marble floors dulled by time, chandeliers draped in cobwebs, and portraits of stern ancestors glaring from the walls. His attention, however, was drawn to a glass case on a side table. Within it rested a satin fan, its ivory handle gleaming, its delicate pleats shimmering in the dim light. A card beside it read simply, "The Fan of Lady Ravenna, 1865 Poirot's." Eyes narrowed. "C'est curieux," he whispered. "This fan, it is more than a relic. It is a player in this drama, n'est-ce pas?" The butler led him to a drawing-room where the other guests were assembling. Poirot's gaze swept over them, cataloguing each with the precision of a watchmaker. There was a retired colonel, his moustache bristling with military pride. A glamorous socialite, her scarlet dress a vivid contrast to her guarded smile. A dour professor, clutching a leather-bound book. A young heiress, nervously twisting a pearl necklace, and a sharp-eyed journalist, whose pen seemed poised to uncover secrets. Others lingered in the shadows, their faces yet to be revealed. A chime sounded, signalling the start of the evening, and the butler announced dinner. As the guests moved toward the dining room, Poirot lingered by the fan's case, his fingers brushing the glass. "You hold a secret, mon ami," he murmured, "and Hercule Poirot, he will unfold it." The air grew heavy with anticipation, as if the manor itself were holding its breath. Somewhere, in the folds of that satin fan, a mystery waited to be unravelled. Chapter 2. Shadows on the Satin Veil. The drawing-room of Ravenwood Manor was a study in faded opulence, its high ceilings adorned with intricate plasterwork, its walls lined with damask wallpaper that had begun to peel at the edges. A massive chandelier hung overhead, its crystals catching the firelight and casting fractured shadows that danced like spectres across the room. Hercule Poirot stood near the hearth, his small, precise figure dwarfed by the grandeur but commanding, attention nonetheless. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, moved from guest to guest, cataloguing their gestures, their glances, their silences. The assembled company was as varied as the pieces on a chessboard, each poised with a purpose yet to be revealed. Poirot had already begun to assign them names in his mind, a habit that helped his little grey cells organize the chaos of human nature. There was Colonel Mortimer Brass, his military bearing betrayed by a nervous tic in his left hand. Lady Vivian Scarlet, the socialite whose scarlet gown seemed to proclaim her audacity. Professor Elias Plum, whose spectacles glinted as he muttered over his book. Miss Beatrice Peacock, the heiress, her youth overshadowed by a palpable anxiety. Mr. Gideon Green, the journalist, whose sly smile suggested he knew more than he let on, and Mrs. Blanche White, a widow with a steely gaze that belied her mourning attire. 3 others lingered at the edges, a dour physician, Dr. Oliver Black, a flamboyant artist, Madame Celeste Ochre, and a quiet diplomat, Mr. Reginald Grey, each adding to the tapestry of suspicion. The satin fan, still resting in its glass case by the entrance, drew Poirot's attention like a magnet. Its ivory handle gleamed under the flickering light, and its delicate pleats seemed to whisper secrets to those who dared listen. Poirot had noted the card beside it, "The Fan of Lady Ravenna, 1865, and sensed it was no mere heirloom. "C'est un symbol," he murmured to himself. "But of what? A scandal? A promise, a betrayal, the butler, a man named Hargreaves, whose face was as impassive as marble, announced dinner with a resonant chime of a silver bell. The guests moved toward the dining room, their footsteps echoing on the marble floor. Poirot lingered, observing how Lady Scarlet's fingers brushed the glass case as she passed, how Colonel Brass's eyes darted toward it, and how Miss Peacock averted her gaze entirely. Interessant, Poirot thought. The fan, it is a mirror reflecting their fears. The dining room was no less grand, its long mahogany table set with crystal and silver that gleamed under a second chandelier. The guests took their places, their conversation stilted, as if each word were a step on thin ice. Poirot, seated near the head of the table, declined the offered wine, preferring his usual tisane, which Hargreaves provided with a deferential bow. The absence of the host was conspicuous, an empty chair at the table's head marked by a single place card. Your host. Where is this mysterious benefactor? Colonel Brass barked, his voice cutting through the murmurs. Damned peculiar, to invite us all and not show his face. Or hers, Lady Scarlet added, her tone laced with amusement. She toyed with a diamond bracelet, her eyes scanning the table. Perhaps they're watching us, waiting to see who cracks first. Nonsense! Professor Plum sniffed, adjusting his spectacles. This is likely some academic exercise, a test of our intellects. I, for one, am here for the library. Ravenwood's collection is said to be unparalleled. Miss Peacock, seated beside Poirot, fidgeted with her napkin. I only came because, well, the letter mentioned my father's name. I thought... Her voice trailed off, and she glanced nervously at the others. Poirot tilted his head, his moustache twitching. Mademoiselle, your father's name? And what did this letter say of him? She hesitated, her cheeks paling. It hinted at a debt. Something from long ago. I don't know more. A debt, Mr. Green echoed, leaning forward, his journalist's instinct awakened. Sounds like blackmail to me. Anyone else get a letter with a sting in its tail? The table fell silent, each guest avoiding the other's eyes. Poirot's gaze returned to the fan, visible through the open doors of the drawing-room. Hargreaves, standing by the wall, cleared his throat. Your host has requested that I share a message before the meal is served, he said. The gathering this evening is not merely social. The Satin Fan, once belonging to Lady Ravenna, holds a secret that concerns one among you. Tonight, that secret will be unfolded. A murmur rippled through the guests. Mrs. White's lips tightened, and Dr. Black's hand paused mid-sip of his wine. Madame Oka let out a theatrical gasp, while Mr. Grey remained impassive, his diplomat's mask unyielding. What secret? Colonel Brass demanded, his face reddening. What's this blasted fan got to do with us? Hargreaves' expression remained unreadable. All will be revealed in time, sir. For now, dinner is served. As footmen appeared with silver trays, Poirot's mind whirred. The fan, the crimson ink, the absent host. Each was a thread in a tapestry he was only beginning to discern. He noted how Lady Scarlet's smile faltered when the fan was mentioned, how Professor Plum's fingers tightened on his fork, how Miss Peacock's eyes darted to the empty chair. Quelque chose se prépare, he thought. A storm, it gathers. The meal proceeded under a veil of tension. the clink of cutlery the only sound for several minutes. Poirot, ever observant, watched the shadows cast by the chandelier, how they seemed to fold and unfold like the pleats of a fan. And then, as the dessert course was cleared, a sudden, deafening crack shattered the silence. The chandelier flickered, plunged into darkness, and the room was swallowed by shadows. Somewhere, in that velvet night, the Satin Fan waited, its secrets poised to unfold. Chapter 3. The Whisper of the Folding Fan. The darkness that engulfed Ravenwood Manor's dining room was absolute, a velvet shroud that smothered sound and sight alike. The sudden blackout, marked by the chandelier's dying flicker, had silenced the clink of silver and the murmur of guarded conversation. For a moment, the only noise was the collective intake of breath from the guests, each suspended in a private cocoon of suspicion. Hercule Poirot, seated at the mahogany table, remained still, his senses attuned to the chaos unfolding in the shadows. "Stay calm, if you please." Poirot's voice cut through the darkness, precise and commanding despite its soft timbre. "Mes amis, remain in your seats. This is no accident, I think." A nervous laugh broke the tension. Lady Vivian Scarlet, her voice tinged with bravado. "A theatrical touch, wouldn't you say, Monsieur Poirot? Our host knows how to make an entrance." "Or an exit," muttered Mr. Gideon Green, the journalist, his tone sharp with suspicion. Before anyone could respond, a faint click echoed from the direction of the drawing-room, followed by the creak of a hinge. Poirot's ears, as finely tuned as a concert pianist's, caught the sound. "Quelque chose se passe," he murmured, his hand tightening on his silver-topped cane. The butler, Hargreaves, called out, his voice steady but strained. "Remain seated, ladies and gentlemen. I shall investigate the cause." The scrape of a match preceded a faint glow as Hargreaves lit a candelabrum, its feeble light casting grotesque shadows on the damask walls. The guests' faces emerged from the gloom. Colonel Mortimer Brass, his moustache bristling with indignation. Miss Beatrice Peacock, clutching her pearl necklace as if it were a lifeline. Professor Elias Plum, his spectacles reflecting the candlelight. Mrs. Blanche White, her lips a thin line of disapproval. Dr. Oliver Black, his physician's calm betraying a flicker of unease. Madame Celeste Ochre, fanning herself with a lace handkerchief. And Mr. Reginald Grey, the diplomat, whose impassive gaze revealed nothing. Poirot's eyes, however, were drawn to the empty chair at the head of the table, its place-card, your host, now slightly askew, as if someone had brushed against it. His gaze then shifted to the open doors leading to the drawing-room, where the glass case housing the Satin Fan stood. In the dim light, he could just make out its silhouette. Or could he? A prickle of intuition stirred his little grey cells. Mon Dieu, he thought, the fan, it is not as it was. Hargreaves returned, his face a mask of professionalism. "A fuse, I suspect," he said. "I have sent for the groundskeeper to restore power. In the meantime, our host has requested I share a further message." The guests leaned forward, their earlier unease now sharpened by curiosity. Hargreaves cleared his throat, holding a small card inscribed in the same crimson ink as Poirot's invitation. "The Satin Fan of Lady Ravenna," he read, "is more than a relic. It is a key to a truth that one among you would kill to keep, hidden. Tonight, that truth will unfold, whether by choice or by force." A gasp rippled through the room. Miss Peacock's hand flew to her mouth, and Colonel Brass slammed his fist on the table, rattling the crystal. "This is preposterous," he barked. "What game is this? Who is this host, and what does this blasted fan have to do with us?" "Perhaps," Poirot interjected, his voice smooth as silk, "it is not the fan itself, Colonel, but what it conceals. A secret, peut-être, written in its folds? Or a symbol of a past that one of you wishes to forget?" Lady Scarlet's laugh was sharp, like breaking glass. "You're suggesting one of us is a villain, Monsieur Poirot. How delightfully melodramatic." Yet her fingers, adorned with rings, twitched nervously, betraying her nonchalance. Professor Plum adjusted his spectacles, his voice pedantic. "Lady Ravenna, you say? I recall a scandal from the 1860s. Something about a stolen fortune and a duel. The fan might be tied to that. A historical artifact, no doubt." "Or a weapon," Mr. Green said, his journalist's instinct cutting through the professor's musings. "Fans have been used to hide daggers, poison, even coded messages. I've seen it in my investigations." Mrs. White's eyes narrowed. "You seem awfully eager to stir trouble, Mr. Green. What's your stake in this?" "Merely an observer," Green replied, his smile sly. "But I'd wager everyone here has something to hide." Poirot listened, his head tilted, his moustache perfectly symmetrical. He noted the way Miss Peacock's gaze darted to the drawing room, how Dr. Black's fingers drummed silently on the table, how Madame Ochre's handkerchief fluttered like a nervous bird. The fan, he sensed, was the pivot around which this mystery turned. He rose, excusing himself with a polite bow, and approached the glass case in the drawing-room. The satin fan lay as before, its ivory handle gleaming, its pleats catching the candlelight. Yet Poirot's sharp eyes detected a subtle change. The card beside it, the fan of Lady Ravenna, 1865, was slightly creased, as if handled in haste. He leaned closer, his breath fogging the glass. "Vous cachez quelque chose," he whispered to the fan. "But Hercule Poirot, he will find it." As he turned back to the dining-room, a faint rustle caught his ear, like silk brushing against silk. It came from the far end of the drawing-room, where a heavy curtain swayed imperceptibly. Poirot's hand tightened on his cane. Someone, or something, had moved in the shadows. The lights flickered back on, bathing the room in a harsh glow. The guests blinked, their faces a gallery of unease. Hargreaves cleared his throat. "Power is restored. Shall we continue with the evening?" But Poirot's attention remained on the curtain and on the fan, whose whisper seemed to grow louder. In his mind, the game, he knew, had only just begun. Chapter 4. A Scream in the Velvet Night. The restored lights of Ravenwood Manor's dining-room did little to dispel the chill that had settled over the guests. The glow of the chandelier, once warm and inviting, now seemed harsh, illuminating faces etched with unease. Hercule Poirot stood by the glass case in the drawing-room, his sharp eyes fixed on the satin fan, its pleats catching the light like a silent accusation. The rustle he had heard behind the curtain lingered in his mind, a whisper of movement that suggested someone, or something, had been watching. The guests, still seated at the mahogany table, exchanged wary glances, their earlier banter replaced by a heavy silence. The butler, Hargreaves, had just resumed serving coffee, when a piercing scream shattered the air, high and sharp, like the cry of a wounded animal. It came from the direction of the grand staircase beyond the drawing-room, echoing through the manor's cavernous halls. "Mon Dieu!" Poirot exclaimed, his cane tapping the floor as he moved swiftly toward the sound. The guests followed, a chaotic procession of rustling silk and hurried footsteps. Colonel Mortimer Brass led the charge, his military instincts overriding his bluster, while Lady Vivian Scarlet clutched her scarlet gown, her face pale beneath her rouge. Miss Beatrice Peacock clung to Mrs. Blanche White, whose steely composure wavered for the first time. Professor Elias Plum, Mr. Gideon Green, Dr. Oliver Black, Madame Celeste Ochre, and Mr. Reginald Grey trailed behind, each betraying a mix of curiosity and dread. At the foot of the grand staircase, sprawled across the marble floor, lay Madame Celeste Ochre, the flamboyant artist. Her vibrant yellow shawl was tangled around her, and her eyes stared blankly at the ceiling, wide with the shock of her final moment. A trickle of blood seeped from a wound at her temple, pooling on the polished stone. In her clenched hand was a torn scrap of satin, its delicate weave unmistakable, a piece of the fan that had rested in the glass case. "C'est un meurtre," Poirot murmured, kneeling beside the body with the precision of a surgeon. His gloved fingers hovered over the wound, noting its clean edge, likely made by a sharp instrument. A blow, swift and deliberate. But why here, and why now? Colonel Brass barked. "Good God, man! She's been murdered! We must search the house at once." "Non, Colonel," Poirot said sharply, rising to his feet. "We search for nothing until Hercule Poirot has examined the scene. To disturb it is to destroy the truth." He turned to the glass case in the drawing-room, visible through the open doors. The satin fan was gone, its case empty save for the card, the fan of Lady Ravenna, 1865, now crumpled as if handled in haste. The torn scrap in Madame Ochre's hand matched the fan's fabric, its edge frayed but its pattern distinct, a delicate embroidery of roses, now stained with blood. Miss Peacock let out a sob, burying her face in her hands. "Who would do this? She was so alive." "Too alive, perhaps," Mr. Green muttered, his journalist's notebook already in hand, scribbling furiously. "She was asking questions about that fan all evening. Said it inspired her art. Maybe she saw something she shouldn't have." Mrs. White's voice was cold. "Or knew something. Artists are observant, Mr. Green. Perhaps more than you." Poirot's eyes narrowed, catching the undercurrent of accusation. He addressed Hargreaves, who stood rigid by the staircase. "Monsieur, when was Madame Ochre last seen alive?" Hargreaves hesitated, his composure fraying. "She excused herself after the lights returned, sir, saying she needed air. I saw her step into the hall not 10 minutes ago." "And the fan?" Poirot pressed. "When did you last see it in its case?" Hargreaves swallowed. "Just before the blackout, sir. I'm certain it was there." Poirot nodded, his mind racing. The blackout had lasted mere minutes, yet in that time the fan had vanished, and Madame Ochre had met her end. He examined the body again, noting her dishevelled shawl and a faint smudge of crimson ink on her wrist, like a partial fingerprint. "Interessant," he murmured. "The ink of the invitation, perhaps, or something more?" Dr. Black knelt beside Poirot, his physician's instincts taking over. "The wound suggests a narrow blade, perhaps a letter-opener or a dagger. Death was likely instantaneous." Poirot's gaze flicked to the guests, each a study in reaction. Lady Scarlet's forced calm, Colonel Brass's clenched fists, Professor Plum's furrowed brow, Miss Peacock's trembling, Mr. Green's keen observation, Mrs. White's icy stare, and Mr. Grey's unreadable silence. One among them, he knew, had wielded the fatal blow. He rose, addressing the group. "Mes amis, we are in the presence of a crime most foul. The Satin Fan, it is no longer merely a relic, it is evidence. I ask that no one leaves this hall until Hercule Poirot has questioned you. The truth, it is hidden, but not for long." D'Achèvre, Hargreaves moved to secure the doors. Poirot's eyes returned to the torn satin in Madame Ocre's hand. Its pleats, even in ruin, seemed to whisper a secret, one that had cost the artist her life. The velvet night pressed against the manor's windows, and Poirot knew the killer was close, watching, waiting for the next fold to unfurl. Chapter 5. Secrets Unfolded in Candlelight. The grand hall of Ravenwood Manor was a cavern of shadows, its marble floors and towering portraits illuminated only by the flickering glow of candelabra. The electricity, sabotaged during the blackout that had cloaked Madame Celeste Ochre's murder, remained unrestored, casting the guests in a chiaroscuro of suspicion and fear. Hercule Poirot stood at the centre of the hall, his small, impeccable figure a beacon of calm amid the chaos. The body of Madame Ocre had been respectfully covered with a velvet drape, but the torn scrap of satin in her hand, ripped from the fan of Lady Ravenna, lay exposed, a silent witness to the crime. The guests gathered in a tense semicircle, clutched candles provided by the butler, Hargreaves, whose stoic demeanour was beginning to fray. Colonel Mortimer Brass paced like a caged lion, his moustache bristling with indignation. Lady Vivian Scarlet leaned against a pillar, her scarlet gown a vivid splash against the gloom, her eyes darting between her fellow guests. Professor Elias Plum clutched his leather-bound book as if it could shield him from the unfolding horror. Miss Beatrice Peacock sat on a velvet chaise, her face pale, her fingers twisting her pearl necklace until it threatened to snap. Mr. Gideon Green, the journalist, scribbled in his notebook, his sharp gaze missing nothing. Mrs. Blanche White stood apart, her black mourning attire blending with the shadows, her expression unreadable. Dr. Oliver Black, the physician, hovered near the body, his professional detachment strained. Mr. Reginald Grey, the diplomat, remained silent, his hands clasped behind his back, his face a mask of neutrality. Poirot's voice, soft yet commanding, broke the silence. Mes amis, a crime has been committed, and the truth, it hides in the folds of this mystery, much like the pleats of the Satin Fan. I, Hercule Poirot, will now ask questions. You will answer with honesty, for the little grey cells, they are not easily deceived. Colonel Brass snorted. Questions? We should be hunting the killer, not playing parlour games. No, Colonel, Poirot replied, his eyes glinting in the candlelight. The hunt, it is here, in the minds and hearts of those present. The killer is among us, and the fan it is the key. Let us begin." He turned first to Miss Peacock, whose trembling hands betrayed her nerves. "Mademoiselle, you spoke of a letter mentioning your father's name. A debt, you said. Tell Poirot, what did this letter reveal?" Miss Peacock's eyes widened, her voice barely above a whisper. It said my father, Lord Peacock, had borrowed money from Lady Ravenna's estate decades ago. A fortune never repaid. The letter hinted that proof was hidden in the manor, and if I came, I could settle the matter. Poirot's moustache twitched. "And this proof, mademoiselle, do you believe it is tied to the fan?" She hesitated, glancing at the torn satin in Madame Ocre's hand. "I don't know." "But Madame Ocre, she asked me about my father earlier, during dinner. She said she'd painted a portrait of Lady Ravenna once, and the fan was in it. She seemed curious." Poirot nodded, filing the information away. He turned to Lady Scarlet, whose smile was a practised mask. "Madame, you touched the glass case of the fan before dinner. Why?" Lady Scarlet's laugh was brittle. "Merely admiring it, Monsieur Poirot. It's exquisite, don't you think? A work of art. I collect such things. Yet your touch, it was not casual." Poirot pressed. "There was intent. What do you know of Lady Ravenna?" Her smile faltered. "Only rumours. A scandal years ago, a lover, a duel, a missing fortune. The fan was said to be her signature, always at her side. But it's just a story, surely." Poirot's eyes narrowed, but he moved on to Professor Plum, whose fingers tightened on his book. "Monsieur le Professeur, you spoke of a scandal tied to Lady Ravenna. What do you know?" Plum adjusted his spectacles, his voice pedantic. "Historical records mention a dispute over her estate in 1865. A fortune in jewels vanished after her death, and her fan was rumoured to hold a clue. A map, perhaps, or a cipher. I came to Ravenwood hoping to study its archives, nothing more." "A cipher," Poirot repeated, his tone thoughtful. "And you, Monsieur Green, you suggested the fan could conceal a weapon, or a message. What prompted this?" Green smirked, tapping his pencil against his notebook. "Instinct, Monsieur Poirot. I've covered enough scandals to know that relics like that fan aren't just decorative. Madame Ocre was poking around, asking about it. Maybe she found something worth killing for." Mrs. White's voice cut through, sharp as a blade. "Or maybe she was killed to silence her. Artists see things others miss. She was watching us all, sketching in her mind." Poirot turned to her, his gaze piercing. "And you, Madame White, what did you see? You stand apart, observing. What is your connection to this manor?" Her lips tightened. "I was Lady Ravenna's companion years ago, before I married. I knew her habits. That fan was her pride, but also her burden. She said it held her heart's secret." Dr. Black cleared his throat, his voice measured. "If I may, Monsieur Poirot, the wound on Madame Ocre suggests a precise strike. The killer knew what they were doing. Perhaps someone with medical knowledge or military training." His glance at Colonel Brass was unmistakable. The colonel bristled. "Are you accusing me, sir? I've killed in war, not in cold blood." "Enough." Poirot raised a hand, silencing the room. "Accusations. They are premature. But the fan, it is missing, and yet He paused, his eyes drawn to a flicker of movement near the grand staircase. There, on a small side table partially obscured, by a curtain lay the Satin Fan, its ivory handle gleaming, its pleats intact, save for the torn scrap in Madame Ocre's hand. "Mon Dieu!" Poirot whispered, crossing to the table. The guests gasped, crowding closer. The fan's reappearance was as startling as its absence, its placement suggesting someone had returned it in haste. Poirot examined it, noting a faint smudge of crimson ink on its handle, matching the mark on Madame Ocre's wrist. "This fan it travels," he said softly. "But why return it? To taunt or to mislead?" He opened the fan with care, its pleats unfurling like a sigh. Tucked within was a small folded note, its edges yellowed with age. The crimson ink was unmistakable, the script elegant. "The truth lies where the rose blooms." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "C'est un indice," he said. "The rose, it matches the embroidery on the satin. But where does it bloom?" As the guests murmured, Hargreaves stepped forward, his face pale. "Sir, the groundskeeper reports the fuse box was deliberately tampered with. Wires cut clean through. This was no accident." Poirot nodded, his mind a whirl of connections. The fan, the note, the ink, the sabotage. "Mes amis, the killer is clever, but not cleverer than Hercule Poirot. We will remain here, under candlelight, until the truth begins to unfold. No one leaves." The flames flickered, casting shadows that danced like secrets across the satin fan. Somewhere in Ravenwood Manor, a killer watched, and Poirot knew the night was far from over. Chapter 6. The Motive Behind the Mask. The candlelight in Ravenwood Manor's grand hall flickered like a pulse, casting long shadows that seemed to writhe across the marble floor. The air was thick with the scent of wax and suspicion, the guests' faces illuminated in a chiaroscuro of fear and defiance. Hercule Poirot stood by the small side table where the Satin Fan had mysteriously reappeared, its ivory handle gleaming, its pleats concealing a note that read, "The truth lies where the rose blooms." The torn scrap of satin, still clutched in the lifeless hand of Madame Celeste Ocre, beneath the velvet drape, was a grim reminder of the stakes. The sabotaged fuse box confirmed that the blackout had been no accident, and Poirot's little grey cells were now fully engaged, weaving the threads of this intricate mystery. "Mes amis," Poirot said, his voice a soft but unyielding command, "the fan, it is no mere ornament, it is a vessel of secrets, and one among you has killed to protect, or to claim, its truth. We will now unfold these secrets, one by one." The guests still gathered in the hall shifted uneasily. Colonel Mortimer Brass, his military bearing, strained, clenched his fists, his eyes darting to the covered body. Lady Vivian Scarlet, her scarlet gown a stark contrast to her pallor, toyed with her diamond bracelet, her smile brittle. Professor Elias Plum clutched his book, his knuckles white, while Miss Beatrice Peacock sat trembling, her pearl necklace now a tangled knot in her hands. Mr. Gideon Green, the journalist, scribbled furiously, his sharp gaze flitting between suspects. Mrs. Blanche White stood like a statue, her mourning attire blending with the shadows, her eyes cold and watchful. Dr. Oliver Black adjusted his cufflinks, his physician's calm fraying, and Mr. Reginald Grey, the diplomat, remained impassive, his silence a shield. Poirot held the satin fan aloft, its pleats catching the candlelight. "This note," he said, unfolding the yellowed paper, "speaks of a rose. The fan's embroidery, it is of roses, n'est-ce pas? But there is more." With delicate precision, he pressed the ivory handle, and a faint click sounded. A small compartment hidden within the handle's base sprang open, revealing a tiny folded parchment. The guests gasped, leaning forward as Poirot extracted it, his gloved fingers steady. "Mon Dieu," he murmured, unfolding the parchment. It was a fragment of a letter, written in the same crimson ink as the invitations, its script elegant but faded. "To the one who holds the fan, the rose garden holds the key. Beware the shadow that follows." The signature was illegible, a mere flourish, but the paper bore the faint scent of rosewater, a detail that did not escape Poirot's notice. "Lady Ravenna's rose garden," Mrs. White said suddenly, her voice cutting through the silence. "It's behind the manor, overgrown now, but she loved it. She said the fan was her rose in winter, always with her." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Madam White, you were her companion. Did she speak of this key? A literal key, perhaps, or a metaphor?" Mrs. White hesitated, her lips tightening. She was secretive. She only said the fan was her legacy, to be guarded at all costs. I thought it sentiment, not this. Poirot turned to Miss Peacock, whose earlier mention of her father's debt intrigued him. "Mademoiselle, you said Madame Ochre spoke of your father and the fan. What exactly did she say?" Miss Peacock's voice trembled. "She said she painted Lady Ravenna's portrait in 1900, long after her death, for a collector. The fan was in the painting, and she noticed a detail, a hidden clasp in the handle. She asked if my father ever mentioned it because of the debt. I thought she was just curious." "Curious enough to die?" Mr. Green interjected, his pencil pausing. "She was sketching in the drawing-room before dinner, wasn't she? I saw her eyeing that fan case like she knew something." Lady Scarlet's laugh was sharp. "You're quick to point fingers, Mr. Green. What about you? Always scribbling, always watching. What's your game?" Green smirked. "Just doing my job, Lady Scarlet. But I'll wager Madame Ochre found that compartment and paid the price." Poirot raised a hand, silencing the brewing argument. "Assez. Let us consider Madame Ochre, an artist, observant as Madame White noted. She saw something, perhaps this compartment, perhaps more. But why was she killed at the staircase, and why was the fan returned?" He paced, his cane tapping rhythmically. "The blackout, it was a diversion. The killer used those moments of darkness to strike, to take the fan, and then to return it. But why? To conceal the theft of this parchment, or to plant it to mislead?" Colonel Brass growled, "This is nonsense. A hidden compartment, a rose garden. What next? We're trapped here with a murderer, and you're playing with paper." "Non, Colonel," Poirot said sharply. "This paper, it is a map to the truth, and the fan, it is the compass. But we must also consider the crimson ink." He pointed to the smudge on Madame Ochre's wrist, now visible in the candlelight, and the matching mark on the fan's handle. "This ink, it links the invitations, the note, and the victim. Someone here is familiar with its use." Dr. Black cleared his throat. Monsieur Poirot, as a physician, I can confirm the wound was made with a small, sharp blade, possibly a scalpel or a letter opener. The ink smudge could be incidental from handling the fan. Or deliberate, Professor, Plum added, his voice cautious. Crimson ink was fashionable in the 1860s, used for private correspondence. If Lady Ravenna wrote that note, it's a clue to her scandal. Mr. Gray, silent until now, spoke softly. Scandals have long shadows, Monsieur Poirot. Perhaps the killer fears exposure, not just of a fortune, but of a name. Poirot's eyes flicked to Gray, noting the diplomat's careful choice of words. Monsieur, you speak of shadows. Have you seen one following this fan? Gray's expression remained unreadable. Only that this manor feels alive with them. A sudden clatter interrupted the exchange. Miss Peacock's candle had slipped from her trembling hand, shattering on the floor. I can't stay here, she cried. Someone's watching us, I know it. Poirot moved swiftly to her side, his voice soothing but firm. Mademoiselle, calm yourself. The truth, it will protect us, but we must remain vigilant. As Hargreaves replaced the candle, Poirot's gaze returned to the fan, its hidden compartment now empty, but for the echo of its secret. The rose garden, the crimson ink, the shadow that followed, each was a thread in the tapestry of murder. He knew the killer was close, their masks slipping with every question. The candlelight flickered, and the satin fan seemed to whisper, urging Poirot to unfold its final secrets. Chapter 7. Footsteps in the Hidden Corridor. The grand hall of Ravenwood Manor, bathed in the wavering glow of candelabra, seemed to hold its breath. The air was heavy with the scent of melted wax, and the unspoken fears of the guests who stood in a tense tableau around the covered body of Madame Celeste Ochre. The satin fan, its hidden compartment now revealed to contain a cryptic note. The truth lies where the rose blooms rested on the side table, its ivory handle gleaming like a beacon in the gloom. Hercule Poirot, his small figure radiating authority, held the folded parchment, his sharp eyes scanning the guests for the slightest betraying gesture. The revelation of the sabotaged fuse box and the crimson ink linking the invitations, the note and Madame Ochre's murder had tightened the web of suspicion. Poirot's little grey cells whirred, piecing together the puzzle. The fan, the rose garden, the shadow that followed. Yet a new sound, faint but unmistakable, had caught his attention during Miss Beatrice Peacock's outburst. A soft creak, like a floorboard yielding under cautious weight, emanating from behind the heavy velvet curtain near the staircase. Mes amis, Poirot said, his voice calm but edged with urgency. The killer, they are not content to wait. There is movement in this manor, and Hercule Poirot, he will find its source. Mademoiselle Scarlet. He turned to Lady Vivian Scarlet, whose quick wit and bold demeanour marked her as a potential ally. You will accompany me. The rest remain here under Monsieur Hargreaves's watch. Lady Scarlet arched an eyebrow, her scarlet gown catching the candlelight. Me, Monsieur Poirot. I'm flattered, but why not the Colonel or the good doctor? Poirot's moustache twitched. Because, madame, you have the eyes of one who misses nothing, and the courage to face what lies in the shadows. Come. She hesitated, then nodded, her diamond bracelet glinting as she followed. The other guests murmured, their faces a gallery of suspicion. Colonel Mortimer Brass, his fists clenched. Professor Elias Plum, clutching his book. Miss Peacock, still, trembling. Mr. Gideon Green, scribbling in his notebook. Mrs. Blanche White, her gaze icy. Dr. Oliver Black, his calm strained. And Mr. Reginald Grey, silent as ever. Poirot approached the velvet curtain, his cane tapping softly. He parted the fabric, revealing a wood-panelled wall adorned with a faded tapestry of a rose garden, its blooms eerily similar to the embroidery on the Satin Fan. His fingers traced the panel's edge, and a faint click sounded as he pressed a hidden catch. The panel swung inward, revealing a narrow, stone-walled corridor, its air damp and heavy with the scent of earth. Mon Dieu! Poirot whispered, his eyes gleaming. A secret passage, as I suspected. Ravenwood Manor. It keeps its secrets well. Lady Scarlet peered over his shoulder, her voice low. A bit theatrical, don't you think? What's next? A skeleton in the walls? Perhaps, madam, Poirot replied, but first we follow the footsteps. He produced a small pocket torch, its beam cutting through the darkness. The corridor was narrow, its floor coated in dust, but faint footprints, small and deliberate, marked the stone. Poirot knelt, examining them. Recent, he said, made within the hour, during the blackout, peut-être. The killer, they used this passage to move unseen. Lady Scarlet shivered, though her tone remained defiant. And what's at the end of this charming tunnel? A treasure or a trap? Poirot did not answer, his focus on the footprints. They led deeper into the passage, which sloped downward, its walls lined with cobwebs. As they advanced, the beam caught a glint of something metallic on the floor, a small silver letter-opener, its blade stained with dried blood. Poirot crouched, careful not to touch it. Voila, the murder weapon, I presume. Dropped in haste, or left to mislead. Lady Scarlet's eyes narrowed. That's no ordinary letter-opener. Look at the handle, engraved with a rose. It matches the fan's embroidery. Poirot nodded, his mind racing. Set exact. The rose, it is everywhere. The fan, the note, the tapestry, now this. But why abandon the weapon here? He wrapped the letter-opener in his handkerchief, tucking it into his pocket. The passage curved, ending at a rusted iron grate that opened into the manor's overgrown rose garden, visible through the bars. The scent of roses, heavy and cloying, drifted through, mingling with the damp air. Poirot examined the grate, noting fresh scratches on its lock, as if someone had forced it open recently. The rose garden, he murmured, recalling the note. The truth lies where the rose blooms. This passage, it leads there. But the killer, they did not escape. They returned to the manor to place the fan back on the table. Lady Scarlet frowned. Why go to all this trouble? If they killed, ochre for the fan, why not keep it? Poirot's eyes gleamed. Because, madame, the fan's secret is not the parchment alone. It is a distraction, a lure. The true secret lies elsewhere. Perhaps in the garden, perhaps in the manor's heart. The killer wishes us to chase the fan, not the truth. A faint sound echoed behind them. A soft, deliberate footstep in the passage. Poirot spun, his torch illuminating nothing but shadows. Lady Scarlet gripped his arm, her bravado faltering. "Someone's there," she whispered. "Oui," Poirot said softly, his voice steady. The shadow that follows, as the note warned. We are not alone. He motioned for silence, leading her back toward the hall. As they emerged, the guests turned, their faces a mix of curiosity and fear. Hargreaves, standing guard, looked startled. "Monsieur Poirot, you found something." "A passage," Poirot said, his tone measured, "and a weapon. The killer. They move through this manor like a phantom. But Hercule Poirot, he sees through shadows." He held up the wrapped letter opener, noting the guests' reactions. Colonel Brass's scowl, Miss Peacock's gasp, Mr. Green's raised eyebrow, Mrs. White's tightened lips, Dr. Black's furrowed brow, Professor Plum's nervous glance, and Mr. Grey's unreadable calm. Lady Scarlet, still at his side, met his gaze, her expression a mix of respect and unease. "The rose garden," Poirot announced. "It holds the next clue. But for now, we remain vigilant. The killer, they are close, and the fan, it whispers. Still!" The candles flickered, casting shadows that seemed to dance with the footsteps in the hidden corridor. Poirot knew the truth was near, hidden in the folds of the Satin Fan and the secrets of Ravenwood Manor. Chapter 8. The Fan's Silent Accusation. The grand hall of Ravenwood Manor seemed to shrink under the weight of its secrets. The candlelight, casting long, wavering shadows that flickered like guilty consciences. The Satin Fan, once a delicate relic, now lay on the side table, its ivory handle marred by a faint smear of blood, its pleats whispering accusations in the dim glow. Hercule Poirot stood beside it, his small, impeccable figure a beacon of order amid the chaos of Madame Celeste Ochre's murder. The blood-stained letter-opener, wrapped in his handkerchief, rested in his pocket, and the cryptic note from the fan's hidden compartment, "The truth lies where the rose blooms," lingered in his mind, pointing to the overgrown rose garden beyond the manor's walls. The guests, gathered in a tense knot, eyed each other with growing suspicion. Colonel Mortimer Brass's face was flushed, his military composure fraying, as he muttered about cowardly assassins. Lady Vivian, scarlet, fresh from her venture into the secret passage with Poirot, leaned against a pillar, her scarlet gown vivid, but her expression guarded. Professor Elias Plum clutched his book, his spectacles glinting as he scanned the room. Miss Beatrice Peacock sat hunched, her pearl necklace now a tangled mess in her lap. Mr. Gideon Green, the journalist, scribbled in his notebook, his sly smile barely concealing his excitement. Mrs. Blanche White stood apart, her mourning attire blending with the shadows, her eyes sharp as knives. Dr. Oliver Black fidgeted with his cufflinks, his physician's calm strained, while Mr. Reginald Grey, the diplomat, maintained his infuriating silence. Poirot held the satin fan aloft, its bloodstains stark against the embroidered roses. "Mes amis," he said, his voice soft but commanding, "the fan, it accuses. This blood, it is fresh, likely from Madame Ochre. But how did it come to be here when the fan was missing during the blackout and returned only after her death?" He opened the fan with care, its pleats unfurling like a sigh. The bloodstain was concentrated near the ivory handle, where the hidden compartment had yielded the cryptic note. Poirot's sharp eyes detected a faint irregularity, a slight bulge in the fabric, suggesting something still concealed within the pleats. With delicate precision, he probed the stitching, and a small flat object slipped out, a thin, metal key, its head engraved with a rose matching the letter opener's design. Mon Dieu, Poirot murmured, holding the key to the candlelight. A key hidden in the fan. To what lock does it belong? The rose garden, perhaps, or something closer? Miss Peacock gasped, her voice trembling. A key? Is that what she died for? Possibly, Mr. Green said, his pencil pausing. Madame Oka was poking around that fan case all evening. If she found that key, it might have been enough to get her killed. Colonel Brass snorted. Nonsense! A key to what? A garden. This is a wild goose chase. Non, Colonel, Poirot countered, his tone sharp. The goose, it is not wild. It is tethered to the truth. This key, like the letter opener, bears the rose motif. The fan, it was used to conceal it, perhaps, to smuggle it from the crime scene. Lady Scarlet's eyes narrowed, her bracelet glinting as she crossed her arms. You're saying the killer hid the key in the fan, then returned it to throw us off? That's bold, even for a murderer. Or desperate, Mrs. White said, her voice cold. Madame Oka was an artist, observant. She might have seen the key when she examined the fan, or suspected its purpose. Poirot nodded, his mind racing. He turned to Dr. Black, whose medical expertise had already confirmed the nature of Madame Oka's wound. Monsieur Black, the blood on the fan, can you confirm it is human and recent? Dr. Black hesitated, then approached, examining the stain with a clinician's eye. It's fresh, likely within the last hour. Human blood, I'd wager, though I'd need a laboratory to be certain. The pattern suggests it was wiped, not splattered. Someone handled the fan after the murder. Poirot's moustache twitched. Exactement. The killer. They used the fan to conceal the key, or perhaps the letter opener itself, before returning it to the table. But why? To protect the key, or to ensure it was found? Professor Plum cleared his throat, his voice pedantic. The rose motif suggests a connection to Lady Ravenna's estate. Historical records mention a locked vault in the rose garden, rumoured to hold her missing jewels. This key might open it. Mr. Gray, silent until now, spoke softly. Or it might open a Pandora's box. Some secrets are better left locked. Poirot's eyes flicked to Gray, noting the diplomat's cryptic warning. Monsieur Gray, you speak of secrets. Do you know of this vault? Gray's face remained impassive. Only rumours, Monsieur Poirot. But in my experience, keys unlock more than doors. They unlock motives. The tension in the room thickened, alliances fraying like worn silk. Miss Peacock's voice broke the silence, high and frantic. We're not safe here. Someone killed Madame Oka, and they're still among us. Calmez-vous, mademoiselle, Poirot said, his tone soothing but firm. The killer, they are clever, but they cannot hide from Hercule Poirot. Let us consider the sequence. The blackout, the murder, the fan's disappearance, its return with blood and a key. Each step, it is deliberate. He paced, his cane tapping rhythmically. Madame Oka was killed at the staircase, her hand clutching a piece of the fan. The letter opener, found in the secret passage, was likely the weapon. The fan, it was taken during the blackout, its key concealed, then returned to mislead us. But the blood on the fan, it is a mistake, a slip of the mask. Lady Scarlet's laugh was sharp. You make it sound like a game, Monsieur Poirot, but someone's playing for keeps. Oui, madame, Poirot replied, his eyes gleaming. And Hercule Poirot, he plays to win." He turned to Hargreaves, who stood by the hall's entrance, his face pale. "Monsieur Hargreaves, you said the fuse box was cut deliberately. Have you searched the manor for other signs of tampering?" Hargreaves nodded. "The groundskeeper found a window in the library forced open, sir. It faces the rose garden. Someone could have entered or left during the blackout." Poirot's mind whirred, connecting the window, the passage, the garden, and the fan. "The rose garden, it calls to us," he said. "But first, we secure this key." He slipped it into his pocket beside the letter opener, noting the guests' reactions. Colonel Brass's scowl, Miss Peacock's fear, Mr. Green's curiosity, Mrs. White's cold stare, Dr. Black's unease, Professor Plum's furrowed brow, Mr. Grey's silence, and Lady Scarlet's calculating glance. As the candles flickered, a sudden draught swept through the hall, extinguishing several flames. In the half-light, the satin fan seemed to glow, its bloodstain a silent accusation. Poirot knew the killer was watching, their motive hidden behind a mask that was beginning to slip. Chapter 9. A Dance of Deceptions. The ballroom of Ravenwood Manor, despite the shadow of murder, shimmered with an eerie grandeur. The candelabra, hastily arranged to compensate for the sabotaged electricity, cast a golden glow across the polished parquet floor, where dust motes danced like ghosts in the flickering light. The grand ball, planned by the absent host before Madame Celeste Oker's death, had been intended as a celebration of Ravenwood's legacy. Now it was a stage for suspicion, a masquerade where every smile concealed a motive. Hercule Poirot stood at the edge of the room, his impeccable suit and polished cane a stark contrast to the chaos of the evening, his sharp eyes scanning the guests as they moved through the motions of a waltz, their steps as guarded as their secrets. The satin fan, now locked in a small safe in the butler's pantry under Poirot's orders, remained the pivot of the mystery. Its bloodstain, the hidden key engraved with a rose, and the cryptic note, "The truth lies where the rose blooms," pointed to a vault in the rose garden. But the killer's identity remained elusive. The blood-stained letter opener from the secret passage, the forced library window, and the crimson ink linking the invitations to the murder formed a tapestry of clues that Poirot's little grey cells were weaving together. Tonight he planned to loosen the killer's mask with a subtle trap, using the ball's forced merriment to provoke a reaction. The guests, dressed in formal attire, moved through the dance with strained elegance. Colonel Mortimer Brass, his military medals gleaming, partnered with Mrs. Blanche White, whose black gown seemed to absorb the light, her eyes cold and watchful. Lady Vivian Scarlet, resplendent in a new emerald gown, her scarlet one retired after the passage's dust, danced with Mr. Reginald Grey, the diplomat, whose silence was as impenetrable as ever. Professor Elias Plum, awkward in his ill-fitting tuxedo, stood near the punch bowl, muttering about historical ciphers. Miss Beatrice Peacock, her face pale beneath a feathered mask, clung to Dr. Oliver Black, whose physician's calm was fraying. Mr. Gideon Green, the journalist, circled the room, his notebook tucked away, but his eyes missing nothing. Poirot had instructed Hargreaves the butler to spread a carefully crafted rumour that the satin fan's key had been examined and was believed to unlock a vault containing Lady Ravenna's lost jewels, to be opened before the night's end. He watched the guests' reactions as the rumour spread, noting the flicker of greed in Colonel Brass's eyes, the tightening of Lady Scarlet's smile, the nervous glance Miss Peacock cast toward the ballroom's French doors, which led to the rose garden. "Mes amis," Poirot announced, his voice cutting through the strains of the orchestra. "Tonight we dance not only for pleasure, but for truth. The fan, it has spoken, and its key, it will lead us to the heart of this mystery. But first, let us enjoy the waltz." He nodded to Hargreaves, who signalled the musicians to play a livelier tune. The guests, wary but compelled by the pretence of normalcy, resumed their dance. Poirot moved among them, his cane tapping softly, his eyes alert. He approached Miss Peacock, whose trembling hands betrayed her fear. "Mademoiselle, you seem distressed. Is it the dance or the thought of the vault?" She flinched, her mask slipping slightly. "It's everything, Monsieur Poirot. That key, I heard it might clear my father's debt. But if someone killed for it—" Her voice trailed off, her eyes darting to Dr. Black, who was now speaking in hushed tones with Professor Plum. Poirot followed her gaze, then turned to Lady Scarlet, who had paused near the French doors, her emerald gown shimmering. "Madame, you admire the garden?" he asked, his tone deceptively casual. She smiled, but her eyes were sharp. "Just imagining where those roses bloom, Monsieur Poirot. You think the vault's out there, don't you?" "Peut-être," Poirot replied, noting her interest. "But the garden, it is dangerous tonight. The shadow that follows, it watches." As the waltz reached a crescendo, a sudden crash echoed from the far end of the ballroom. A candelabrum had fallen, its flames extinguished in a pool of wax, plunging half the room into shadow. The guests froze, and in that moment Poirot saw a figure slip through the French doors toward the rose garden. He moved swiftly, signalling Lady Scarlet to follow. Her quick wits had proven useful before. Outside, the rose garden was a tangle of thorns and moonlight, the air heavy with the scent of decaying blooms. Poirot's torch cut through the darkness, revealing Miss Peacock, her feathered mask discarded, standing near a stone fountain overgrown with roses. In her hand was a small, sharp dagger, its blade glinting as she raised it toward her own wrist. "Mademoiselle!" Poirot called, his voice sharp. "Stop!" Miss Peacock turned, her face a mask of despair. I can't live with it. The debt, the shame, it's all in that vault. Madame Oak knew, and now she's dead because of me." Then Scarlet grabbed her arm, wresting the dagger away. "Don't be a fool, Beatrice. Killing yourself won't solve anything." Poirot approached, his expression grave. "Mademoiselle, explain. What did Madame Oak know?" Tears streamed down Miss Peacock's face. She said the fan's key opened a vault with papers proving my father's debt was fraud. She wanted to help me find it, but someone overheard us. I didn't kill her, I swear." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And this dagger? It was in my room," she sobbed. "Someone left it there with a note. Keep silent or join her." Poirot examined the dagger, noting its rose-engraved handle, identical to the letter-opener. "Ah, mon Dieu! Another weapon, another warning. The killer, they grow bold." He turned back to the ballroom, where the guests had gathered at the French doors, their faces pale in the moonlight. Colonel Brass bellowed, "What's this nonsense? Another attack?" "Non, Colonel," Poirot said, his voice steady. "A second murder, thwarted. But the killer, they are among you, and the fan, it points to them." He held up the dagger, its rose motif gleaming, and noted the guests' reactions. Mrs. White's clenched jaw, Mr. Green's raised eyebrow, Dr. Black's sudden stillness, Professor Plum's nervous fidgeting, Mr. Gray's unreadable gaze. The Satin Fan, locked away but ever present in their minds, seemed to pulse with accusation, its secrets unfolding with every step towards the rose garden. "Mes amis," Poirot said, "the dance, it is over. Tomorrow we open the vault. But tonight no one leaves this manor." The moonlight cast long shadows across the roses, and Poirot knew the killer's mask was slipping, caught in the silent folds of the Satin Fan. Chapter 10. The Truth in the Folded Pleats. The drawing-room of Ravenwood Manor was a theatre of shadows, its damask walls and heavy drapes bathed in the flickering light of candelabra. The air was thick with tension, the scent of wax mingling with the faint perfume of roses drifting from the open French doors that led to the garden. Hercule Poirot stood at the centre of the room, his small, impeccable figure commanding the attention of the assembled guests. The Satin Fan, retrieved from the butler's safe, rested on a mahogany table beside him, its blood-stained pleats and hidden key gleaming like a silent witness. The murder of Madame Celeste Ochre, the thwarted attempt on Miss Beatrice Peacock's life, and the web of clues, crimson ink, a secret passage, a rose-engraved letter-opener, and a cryptic note, had led to this moment, the unveiling of the truth. The guests sat in a semicircle, their faces a gallery of apprehension and defiance. Colonel Mortimer Brass, his military medals dulled by candlelight, gripped the arms of his chair. Lady Vivian Scarlet, in her emerald gown, toyed with her bracelet, her eyes sharp but wary. Professor Elias Plum clutched his book, his spectacles fogging slightly. Miss Peacock, pale and trembling, sat beside Mrs. Blanche White, whose morning attire seemed to absorb the light, her gaze icy. Mr. Gideon Green, the journalist, held his notebook, his pencil poised. Dr. Oliver Black adjusted his cufflinks, his physician's calm strained, while Mr. Reginald Gray, the diplomat, maintained his enigmatic silence. Hargreaves, the butler, stood by the door, his face pale but composed. "Mes amis," Poirot began, his voice soft yet resonant, "we have danced a dance of deceptions. But now Hercule Poirot will unfold the truth hidden in the pleats of this Satin Fan. A murder has been committed, an attempt made on another life, and the killer, they are among us. Let us retrace the steps of this crime." He lifted the fan, its blood-stain stark against the embroidered roses. Madame Celeste Ochre was killed at the foot of the grand staircase, a torn piece of this fan in her hand. The weapon, a letter-opener with a rose motif, was found in a secret passage leading to the rose garden. The fan, missing during the blackout, reappeared with a blood-stain and a hidden key, accompanied by a note. The truth lies where the rose blooms. These clues, they are not random. They are the threads of a tapestry woven by a cunning hand. Poirot paced, his cane tapping rhythmically. Let us begin with the fan. It belonged to Lady Ravenna, whose scandal, a missing fortune, a duel, a lover, haunts this manor. The fan. It was her rose in winter, as Madam White called it, a vessel for her secrets. Its hidden compartment held a key and a note, pointing to a vault in the rose garden. But why was Madame Ochre killed? He turned to Miss Peacock, whose eyes widened. Mademoiselle, you told us Madame Ochre spoke of your father's debt, tied to Lady Ravenna's estate. She knew of the fan's hidden clasp, having painted it in a portrait. She suspected it held proof of fraud, a document that could clear your family's name. This made her dangerous. Miss Peacock nodded, her voice trembling. She wanted to help me, but someone overheard us. We, Poirot said, his gaze shifting to the group. Someone who feared exposure. Let us consider the sequence. The blackout, caused by a sabotaged fuse box, gave the killer darkness to act. They struck Madame Ochre, took the fan, and fled through the secret passage, dropping the letter opener in haste. But they returned the fan, blood-stained, with the key inside. Why? Professor Plum cleared his throat. To mislead us, perhaps? The key points to the vault, distracting from the real motive. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Exactement, monsieur. But the blood on the fan, it was a mistake. The killer handled it after the murder, perhaps to hide the key, but left a trace of their guilt. He held up the rose-engraved dagger found with Miss Peacock, its threatening note, "Keep silent or join her," in crimson ink. This dagger, like the letter opener, bears the rose motif. It was left in Mademoiselle Peacock's room to silence her, for she, too, knew of the fan's secret. But who had access to such weapons, and the crimson ink? Dr. Black shifted uncomfortably. As I said, the wound suggests a precise hand, perhaps a soldier or a surgeon. Colonel Brass bristled. You dare accuse me, sir? I've no patience for this cloak and dagger nonsense. Patience, Colonel, Poirot said, raising a hand. Let us consider motive. Madam White, you were Lady Ravenna's companion. You knew of the fan's burden. Did you know of the vault? Miss White's lips tightened. She spoke of a safe place for her legacy, but I never saw it. I left her service before her death. Poirot turned to Lady Scarlet, whose bracelet glinted as she leaned forward. Madam, you admired the fan, touched its case. You collect such relics. Did you seek its key? Lady Scarlet's smile was sharp. I'm no thief, Monsieur Poirot. I admired its beauty, nothing more. Mr. Green interjected, his voice sly. Beauty's a fine motive, but greed's better. That vault's rumoured to hold jewels worth a fortune. Someone here's desperate enough to kill for it. Mr. Grey spoke at last, his voice soft but piercing. Or to protect a name. Scandals, Monsieur Poirot, can destroy more than fortunes. Poirot nodded, his mind connecting the threads. The crimson ink, it is the final clue. It matches the invitations, the note in the fan, and the threat to Mademoiselle Peacock. Only one among you has a connection to such ink, used by Lady Ravenna for her private letters. He paused, his eyes locking onto Dr. Oliver Black. Monsieur Black, you are a physician, but also a collector of rare manuscripts. In your luggage, I suspect we would find a bottle of crimson ink, purchased from an antiquarian in Sussex, where Lady Ravenna's letters were auctioned. You knew of the fan's secret, learned from those letters. Madame Ochre, with her artist's eye, saw you, examining the fan case before dinner. She confronted you, and you silenced her. Dr. Black's face paled, his cufflinks glinting as he stood. "This is outrageous. I'm no murderer." "Non?" Poirot said, his voice relentless. "The letter opener found in the passage was yours, a gift from a patient, engraved with a rose. You used it to kill Madame Oka, then hid the key in the fan to mislead us. The dagger left to silence Mademoiselle Peacock was from your collection, its note written in your ink." The room erupted in gasps. Colonel Brass roared, "Prove it, man!" while Lady Scarlet's eyes widened, and Miss Peacock sobbed. Mrs. White's gaze hardened, and Mr. Green scribbled furiously. Poirot held up the key. "The vault, it holds the proof, a document exposing your family's role in Lady Ravenna's scandal, Monsieur Black. You killed to protect your name, not for jewels." Dr. Black lunged for the French doors, but Hargreaves and Colonel Brass seized him. "You've no evidence," Black shouted, struggling. "Au contraire," Poirot said, producing a small vial of crimson ink from Black's coat pocket, retrieved during the ball's chaos. "The truth, it is unfolded." The guests stared, the fan's pleats seeming to shimmer with vindication. The killer's mask had slipped, but Poirot knew the vault held one final secret, waiting in the rose garden's shadows. Chapter 11. The Final Unfurling. The rose garden of Ravenwood Manor lay cloaked in moonlight, its overgrown thorns and faded, blooms casting jagged shadows across the stone path. The air was heavy with the cloying scent of roses, a reminder of the cryptic note found in the Satin Fan. The truth lies where the rose blooms. Hercule Poirot led the procession from the drawing-room. His small, impeccable figure, a beacon of resolve in the flickering glow of torches carried by Hargreaves, the butler. The Satin Fan, its blood-stained pleats and hidden key now symbols of justice, was tucked securely in Poirot's pocket, alongside the rose-engraved letter-opener and the vial of crimson ink that had unmasked Dr. Oliver Black as the murderer of Madame Celeste Oka. The guests followed, their faces etched with a mix of dread and anticipation. Colonel Mortimer Brass marched with military precision, his medals glinting, though his eyes betrayed unease. Lady Vivian Scarlet, her emerald gown shimmering, walked with a calculated grace, her bracelet catching the torchlight. Professor Elias Plum clutched his book, muttering about historical vaults, while Miss Beatrice Peacock, no longer trembling, held her head high, her fear replaced by a fragile hope. Mrs. Blanche White, her mourning attire stark against the moonlit garden, moved with quiet intensity. Mr. Gideon Green, the journalist, scribbled in his notebook, eager to capture the story's climax. Mr. Reginald Grey, the diplomat, remained silent, his enigmatic gaze fixed on the path ahead. Dr. Black, his wrists bound by Hargreaves's sturdy knot, was escorted by the colonel, his face a mask of defiance despite his exposure. "Mes amis," Poirot said, his voice cutting through the night's stillness, "the fan has led us here, to the rose garden, where Lady Ravenna's vault awaits. Its contents they will confirm the truth and lay bare the motive for murder. Allons-y." The group reached a stone fountain at the garden's centre, its basin choked with ivy and rose petals. A low iron door, half hidden by thorns, was set into the fountain's base, its surface engraved with a single rose matching the key's design. Poirot knelt, his gloved fingers brushing away dirt to reveal a small, rusted lock. "Voilà," he murmured, producing the key from the fan's compartment. "The truth, it is here." As he inserted the key, Dr. Black lunged forward, his bound, hands straining. "You'll find nothing," he shouted, his voice hoarse. "It's a myth, a fable." Colonel Brass tightened his grip. "Quiet, man. You've done enough damage." The lock clicked, and the door creaked open, revealing a small damp chamber lined with stone. Inside was a metal box, its lid engraved, with the same rose motif. Poirot opened it with care, extracting a bundle of yellow documents tied with a faded ribbon. The topmost paper, written in crimson ink, bore Lady Ravenna's elegant script. Poirot's eyes scanned it, his moustache twitching with satisfaction. "Mon Dieu," he said, holding the document aloft. "This is the proof, a ledger detailing a fraudulent loan orchestrated by Dr. Black's grandfather, a banker who swindled Lady Ravenna's fortune. The debt pinned on Mademoiselle Peacock's father was a lie used to cover the theft. Madame Ocre, with her artist's eye, recognized the fan's clasp from a portrait and suspected its secret. She confronted Dr. Black, who killed her to protect his family's name." Miss Peacock gasped, tears welling. "Then my father. He was innocent." "Oui, mademoiselle," Poirot said gently. "This document clears his name. The vault, it was Lady Ravenna's safeguard, hidden by the fan's key." Dr. Black's shoulders slumped, his defiance crumbling. I couldn't let it come out. My family's reputation, my career, it would have been ruined. Ochre saw me open the fan's clasp during dinner. She knew too much." Lady Scarlet's voice was sharp. "So you killed her and tried to silence poor Beatrice with that dagger. Despicable!" Mrs. White stepped forward, her eyes blazing. "You used Lady Ravenna's ink, her legacy, to cover your shame. I served her, protected her secrets. You're no better than the thieves she despised." Poirot raised a hand, silencing the accusations. "Assez. The fan, it was the key, not just to the vault, but to Dr. Black's motive. He used the blackout, caused by his sabotage, to strike Madame Ocre at the staircase, tearing the fan's satin in the struggle. He hid the letter opener in the secret passage, hoping to mislead us, and returned the fan with the key to divert suspicion to the vault. The dagger, left in Mademoiselle Peacock's room, was a desperate attempt to silence her knowledge." Mr. Green's pencil scratched furiously. "A hell of a story, Monsieur Poirot. But how do you know about the ink?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. The crimson ink. It was the thread that bound all clues. The invitations, the note in the fan, the threat to Mademoiselle Peacock, and the smudge on Madame Ocre's wrist. Dr. Black, a collector of rare manuscripts, had access to such ink, a relic of Lady Ravenna's era. His mistake was using it, linking him to the crime. Professor Plum nodded, his voice subdued. The rose motif, too, on the letter opener, the dagger, the key. It was Lady Ravenna's signature, tying her legacy to this tragedy. Mr. Gray spoke softly, his first words since the drawing-room. "A legacy of truth, Monsieur Poirot. You've honoured it." Poirot bowed slightly. "Merci, monsieur. But the truth, it is not mine. It belongs to the fan, to Lady Ravenna, to justice." As Hargreaves secured Dr. Black for the authorities, The guests stood in silence, the weight of the revelation settling over them. The rose garden, once a place of secrets, now glowed with the clarity of moonlight. The satin fan, its pleats unfurled at last, had revealed its final truth, and Poirot knew the manor's shadows would haunt no more. Chapter 12. The Fan Closes. The dawn broke over Ravenwood Manor with a gentle light, its rays filtering through the mist that clung to the Sussex hills. The rose garden, once a labyrinth of secrets, lay quiet, its thorns softened by the morning dew. Inside the manor, the grand hall was no longer a stage for suspicion, but a place of closure, its marble floor gleaming faintly under the restored electricity. Hercule Poirot stood by the glass case in the drawing-room, where the satin fan of Lady Ravenna had been returned, its blood-stained pleats cleaned, its ivory handle polished to a soft glow. The case's card, "The Fan of Lady Ravenna, 1865, was once again pristine, as if the events of the past night had been folded away like the fan itself. The guests, or what remained of them, were preparing to depart. Dr. Oliver Black had been taken into custody by the local authorities, summoned by Hargreaves in the early hours. His confession, wrung from him in the Rose Garden's vault, had laid bare his motive, to protect his family's name from the scandal of a fraudulent loan orchestrated by his grandfather. The documents found in the vault had not only exposed his crime, but cleared the name of Miss Beatrice Peacock's father, lifting a decades-old burden from her family. Poirot watched as the guests gathered their belongings, their faces marked by the weight of the night's revelations. Colonel Mortimer Brass, his military bluster subdued, adjusted his medals with a sigh, as if acknowledging the futility of pride in the face of truth. Lady Vivian Scarlet, her emerald gown replaced by a more sombre grey, packed her jewellery with care, her sharp wit tempered by the memory of her role in saving Miss Peacock. Professor Elias Plum, his book now tucked under his arm, muttered about updating his historical records with the truth of Lady Ravenna's fortune. Miss Peacock, her eyes bright with newfound hope, clutched the vault's documents, her pearl necklace repaired and gleaming. Mr. Gideon Green, the journalist, was already drafting his story, his notebook filled with the night's drama. Mrs. Blanche White, her mourning attire unchanged, stood by the staircase, her gaze lingering on the fan's case, as if bidding farewell to Lady Ravenna's legacy. Mr. Reginald Grey, the diplomat, offered a quiet nod to Poirot before slipping out, his silence as enigmatic as ever. Hargreaves approached, his butler's composure restored but softened by gratitude. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, bowing slightly, "the manor owes you a debt. You've brought peace to Lady Ravenna's memory." Poirot's moustache twitched, a faint smile playing on his lips. "No, Monsieur Hargreaves. The debt it is to the truth. The fan, it was her voice, speaking across the years. Hercule Poirot, he only listened." He turned to the fan, its pleats now still, its secrets unfolded. The crimson ink, the rose engraved, letter opener and dagger, the secret passage, the hidden key, the vault, all had been threads in a tapestry of deception, woven by Dr. Black's desperation. The fan had been the pivot, its delicate beauty concealing a truth that had cost Madame Celeste Ochre her life, and nearly claimed Miss Peacock's. Poirot's little grey cells had unravelled the mystery, but he felt no triumph, only a quiet satisfaction that justice had been served. As the guests departed, their footsteps echoing in the hall, Miss Peacock lingered, approaching Poirot with a shy smile. "Monsieur Poirot, I can't thank you enough. My father's name is clear now. I can live without shame." Poirot bowed, his eyes kind. "Mademoiselle, the shame was never yours. Live well, and let the roses bloom in your heart." She nodded, tears brimming, and joined the others in the waiting cars. Lady Scarlet paused at the door, glancing back. "You're a remarkable man, Monsieur Poirot. If ever you need an ally, you know where to find me." Poirot chuckled softly. "Madame, your courage in the passage, it was invaluable, but let us hope for quieter days." As the manor emptied, Poirot stood alone by the fan's case, his cane resting lightly in his hand. The morning light caught the fan's embroidery, its roses seeming to glow with a serene finality. "Vous avez parlé, mon ami," he murmured to the fan. "And the truth, it is beautiful, like the symmetry of the mind." He turned to leave, his thoughts drifting to the nature of secrets, how they fold into the heart like the pleats of a fan waiting for the right moment to unfurl. Ravenwood Manor, its shadows dispelled, stood as a testament to the elegance of truth, and Poirot, with a final glance at the fan, stepped into the dawn, ready for the next mystery to unfold.